so I've just hit record now. If you don't want to be recorded, we ask that you kindly drop out of the session. And we just also ask that you just keep your microphone on mute. I'm not sure who's just dropped in. I think maybe you, Rose, so I'm just muting you. Welcome. Okay, so we'd also like to thank our partners in the series. We've got Royal Lifesaving Society Australia. We've had well over 5 or 6 presentations from Royal Life today inclusive. Commercial Aquatics Australia, OTM Sport and Leisure Planning Group, YMCA Victoria, the Victoria State Government, Belgravia Leisure, Cleaning Melbourne, VACA, Aligned Leisure, our Watch Around Water accredited facilities, EcoSave, and of course Western Leisure Services. Upcoming webinars in this management leadership stream, we have next Thursday at Time to Be Bold, John Summers of Leisure Management Excellence. For those that don't know John was instrumental in setting up South Australia Aquatic and Leisure Centre, as well as overseeing, as far as I understand, nearly all of the recreation and leisure services for YMCA Victoria in their sort of at their height. Alison Dixon, CEO of Western Leisure Services, the following week. We have Professor Emma Sherry, President of Tennis Victoria. I'm just going to mute someone here. Here we go. So we have Professor Emma Sherry, President of Tennis Victoria, and a professor at Swinburne University the following week. And then we have Gavin Mahoney and Brendan Mayer from an organization called Leading Teams, talking about creating a new normal and values in the post and or COVID-19 era. Today's session, we have Craig Roberts back with us from Royal Lifesaving Society Australia. This is Craig's 4th presentation in the series. There's a number of recordings from Craig's sessions up on our webpage, and I've just went through all the views this morning. We've had up to 300 views on some of those sessions. Craig is the National Operations Manager for Royal Lifesaving Society Australia, and a significant subject matter expert in water safety, and creating the, obviously overseeing the creation of the latest iteration of the guidelines for safe pool operations. Today's session is the National Aquatic Industry Workforce Profile, and Craig's going to walk you through that. If you've got any questions throughout the session, please drop them in the chat bar like I mentioned before. And without any further ado, Craig, welcome. Thanks for coming back on the series. I feel like I'm talking to you every other day, and you were on yesterday, obviously. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's great to be able to engage with the industry as well. So it's important during these times. I'm just going to do the share screen. Hopefully everyone has got the share screen.
Perfect. Yep.
Now, glad you do, because I don't. So today I'm going to give you a bit of an insight to part 1 of the National Aquatic Industry Workforce Profile. A bit of background for those who are online is that the National Aquatic Industry Safety Committee we're really looking at a number of key research strategies for the industry. The first one being drownings and in public pools. And some of that work was completed a number of years ago in terms of fatal and non-fatal drownings in public pools. The second key part of body of work that really wanted to be looked at was the aquatic industry workforce, and we really didn't have a good solid understanding at a national level of the size of the workforce and some of the issues and impacts to the workforce that is going on. Obviously, this has been completed pre-COVID times, so I'll put that disclaimer in there. And some of these positions and points of view may have changed. On the left-hand side there, that is the document that's been published, which is the snapshot of the workforce profile, which I'm going to go through with you today. But interestingly enough, there is a part 2 at the moment, and which includes not only the second part of this survey, but also some behavioural research that's been undertaken in this sort of space as well, and I'll explain that later on as well. So what is the objectives of the Workforce Development Project? Really, it's to achieve some of that greater insight into the understanding of the aquatic industry workforce. but ultimately to be able to use some key evidence to build the capacity and the capability of the workforce. One of the key things that's an objective of the Aquatic Industry Committee is to ensure that there's a strong, sustainable and responsive industry to the various needs of our stakeholders. So what is workforce development? In terms of this project, we really factored it as a multifaceted approach to developing both individuals, but also organisational and systematic factors within the aquatic industry. We recognise from this project and from other industry workforce profiles and the like, is that there's a number of individual needs that are addressed, and that's differing from where you live versus what your role is or what your age is or what your background is. But certainly at an organisational level and across the whole industry, and how some things that we can really look at in this sort of space. The other part is to look at this in a fairly broad, holistic point of view. There has been some individual reports done by states at different stages in the past, but they really haven't looked at a full range of factors that impact the industry and the workforce itself. So combining a number of those other research areas was really important as part of this project. So what did we do? Initially, there was a desktop research. So that desktop research looked at over 50 different types of documents already existing in terms of research that's in that space. Bits and pieces that we knew about the industry through previous pieces, but not just the aquatic industry as well. Depending on how you frame it, the aquatic industry also fits in the aquatic and fitness, or the recreation, or the sport and recreation, or whatever else the scope may be. So it's important that we looked at some of the research that's already been done in this space, as well as some of the work that we looked at was what other industries are doing of a similar nature in that area. Some of you may have participated in this, and thank you if you. Whoa, what happened there? Thank you if you did, but certainly the something's going on here. Someone's moving my mouse. There was about 3,500 people that participated in the online survey that we did. It was a fairly a big survey. Initially, we had a small one, but there was a number of questions that the Aquatic Industry Committee and Rural Lifesaving really wanted to know that we didn't have any previous data on. So it was about a 52 question survey that went out. We were expecting about 1,200 to 1,500 respondents across the country to get a sample survey. So certainly 3,500 was a fairly good result. As part of that, a number of people left their details in the online survey, and we conducted one-on-one interviews with those individuals as well. That one-on-one interviews was actually done by Griffith University up in Queensland, and we've done a number of projects with them. And they are behavioural scientists who specialise in understanding a whole new level and depth of research in terms of behavioural patterns and thinkings that bring forward a whole different range of results that we've done. We were supposed to do focus groups given COVID. That was going to occur with COVID times as well, and we may still do that post COVID times. But given the views and impacts, given the impacts that COVID would have on particular views at the moment, we've suggested not to go down that focus groups right now. There's been a range of industry consultation, and we'll continue to do that as we grow into the next stage of this process. So what is the outputs? Certainly the initial report gives us a picture of what the aquatic industry is and how to determine the size and the nature of the aquatic industry. So what it does tell us is it tells us we've broken it up into a number of key roles. Obviously, the main ones being pool lifeguards, swim teachers, and technical operators, but also customer service, duty managers, swim school managers, and also what we generally term those back-end customer service, marketing, and business staff as well. From there, the output will be an aquatic industry development strategy. So the National Aquatic Industry Committee have agreed to develop a strategy that will coincide with the Australian Water Safety Council strategy, or Australian Water Safety Strategy, which will come out later this year, and will be a broad overarching 10-year strategy with some 5-year priorities in that space. And the workforce strategy will be a engagement effort that we'll do as part of that process as well. Some key things that strategy will look at is there's a number of questions about what are some of the core competencies that each individuals or different types of roles need and want or are missing, and what are some of the professional development programs and how they're run and what they run and for how long they go for as well. Part of that process is also to be able to benchmark some best practice in this space. What we really want to be able to do is to understand not just within our industry, but across different organisations in terms of benchmarking what that best practice is for different areas. And the other key part of this is certainly some collaboration programs. So we recognise that the industry, while there's some 1,200 facilities across the country and just as many swim schools in their own right, there's a real need to collaborate on some of these areas. We are a fairly small industry compared to some others in this sort of space. The other part, which is really trying to, which really I guess we knew, but trying to solidify, is about career pathways. And when we see some of the results, you'll see how, as an industry, we really need to work on some of these career pathways and what the future is of our industry. So a bit of background: September 18 to April 19, we did the desktop research. We've designed and delivered the survey, and these next steps in terms of the quality of research, the data, and the profile report, review feedback have all been undertaken in that sort of space. So what's some of the insights? Some of these may be relevant for you, but may not be relevant for you in this sort of space. This is an example of female to male, so very much a female, 3/4 to a quarter of a female-dominated industry within the sector. And Queensland's probably the only one different, which is slightly less males than females in this space. And I'm going to use Queensland as an example with some of the different pieces in this area. If you have a look at some of the age brackets that we typically deal with, one of the interesting things is that most people probably would have said that our 18 to 24-year-olds is actually our main age in the workforce. But the reality is certainly our 45 to 54-year-olds is the case in the workforce, and closely followed by our 35 to 45-year-old. It's typically our lifeguards and our swim teachers, which start off at that 18 to 24-year-old age group, but there's older groups that come into this space as well. So if you want to look at employment status, and this is probably a not familiar factor in terms of the 46% casual, and we've only got 27% full time. Certainly through our current times of COVID arrangements, we were able to identify through this survey a lot of information in terms of what this meant for COVID-19 and the sort of the financial impacts on that as well. If you haven't seen the media release that we did during COVID, that's certainly on the Raw Life Saving website in terms of some of the impacts to the aquatic industry. But it was the using of this data that really gave us some insights. We used it from a national level to go to the federal government to actually paint the picture for them about what the situation was in Australia in regards to the aquatic industry and how we were being impacted on that space. That sort of equates roughly to about 21,000 full-time staff and about 14,800 casuals who during that time, during the COVID times, have been seeking the JobKeeper scheme as part of this as well. But the scary thing is the high turnover. Given casuals and the length of time that you're in a facility in that sort of space as well. I want to talk about hours week. We're not necessarily a large workforce where the hours that are worked per week is your typical sort of 37.5 or 40 hours a week. As you can see there's large proportions of our workforce that are less than that. Casual workforce, university students make up a large proportion of that as well. But it's very, very difficult to keep people in the industry when you've got not necessarily a constant flow of hours worked in this space. One of the interesting things that we looked at as part of this as well is that number of roles, including lifeguards and swim teachers primarily, actually have 2 roles in the industry, and still with those 2 roles, they're not necessarily reaching that sort of 30-hour mark or more in this sort of space. Very much in terms of our survey here, and this was a bit construed, but certainly swimming and water safety teachers made up the majority. The other, which was sort of the behind the scenes type workers, really made up a large percent. But one of the interesting factors that we got out of this survey is that the pool lifeguards, which we know from training numbers and the like, is a lot more than 7%, and we really factored this as the results of the workforce profile in this sort of sense, skewed the results of this space, and we've done some further work in this area to try and look at the lifeguards in particular as well. Age at commencement of employment. So these are some of the key factors in here. The really interesting one for me is the 25 to 34. We really believed that the 18 to 24 was the key age that the most people were joining the sector. But the reality is it's not that case. And if you have a look at the results specifically by job role, you can see there is a case where some people are simply finishing high school, doing different forms of university, and then joining the sector at that 25 to 34 year age group as well. But obviously there is some key bits there in terms of the 15 to 17 age group of those high school kids, typically your lifeguards, in this sort of space becoming part of the industry. In terms of how long was our staff staying in active employment, and active employment was defined as more than 15 hours a week of a regular basis in this sort of sense, and really 1 to 5 years is the key time. But there is a number of people, as you can see there, about 1/5 of people will go from that 11 to 20 years time frame, and even more than 21 years. So it's good to see that we have got some longevity in the industry, especially in that swim teacher environment. And there's generally a trend where people are coming and going on a casual basis or on a more permanent part-time basis, but they're still staying within the sector in that sort of space. The hard one there is if you have a look at some of the less than 1 year and the 1 to 5 years factors and the amount of time we spend on training with individuals, if you break that down from to 3 years, you've got a majority of that 26% in the 1 to 5 years. So we do have around just under 30% of people who we train, or 1/3 who are involved in the industry and we spend a lot of time with, who aren't necessarily staying with us, and that's some areas that we've looked at in this space. One of the areas we looked at in terms is why you become part of the aquatic industry and what's some of the reasons for the enjoyment in that sort of space. And as you can see, there's some broad ranging topics there that people chose, but really much that people interactivity and the engagement with individuals or the community is very much a key part of why our industry does what they do in this sort of space and making a difference, which is a large part of certainly our frontline workforce and our aquatic facilities in this sort of space as well. One of the areas that we looked at across the survey was about job skills in terms of gaps and the gaps that we look at, not the ones that we get typically in our pool lifeguard course or our tech ops course or but what are some of those top 5 job skills that we're looking for in our positions, and we want more information on as well. And very much these ones came up as those top 5. Interesting enough from and there's no particular order of these ones here, but as you can see from the topics there, there's a lot of interpersonal skills that are being sought after from the industry, which suggests that these are the ones that they're using more often than not, and the ones that the industry believe that they're not necessarily getting enough of in this sort of space. The adaptation and versatility one is obviously a very interesting one, and how you skill an industry to be more adaptable and versatile is something that certainly needs some deliberation and some thought in that sort of space. One of the areas that we looked at is in terms of professional development. There was a number of questions about professional development in the survey, noting that most people do an entry course into the sector, and then there's a range of ongoing professional development that they do. Typically, professional development is a course, but we looked at the broad range of professional development in this sort of space as well. And this gives you, I guess, a small insight into some of the wordings and some of the different information that was found in the area there. I'm just going to get you to have a look at some of those different wordings as well. If you can have a look at the size of those words, they all mean that there's more people who are seeking more information about some of these areas there. So certainly a very strong focus there from a swimming and water safety nature, and that's obviously relevant to the audience that were involved in the space as well, which is a fairly interesting way of looking at of what some of the needs are that we knew in terms of a preferred PD topic. I think there's one more here. No. One of the, I'm just trying to find the report for you as well. If I can, I've just lost it on my screen. Sorry, bear with me. In the document itself, the way in which we presented the data of these information is really giving this snapshot to what I've talked about in some of the key areas, and this is information is downloadable now. The picture I've given you today is really about the workforce generally, but there's a lot of information in here that really looks at the different roles. And some of that information that we can really ask for in the different areas. So interesting enough, some of the areas here which I didn't speak about, which gives you an idea of what's in the system. We've got about 15% of our workforce weren't born in Australia. 85%, 2% are Indigenous. Certainly the female thing, as we talked about as well. But some of the other areas there is the workforce financial aspects in terms of the pay scale, and that's prominent with the amount of hours that generally the sector is working, in terms of especially within the student ratio and the amount of people that are doing two roles in that area as well. But some of the other key areas we looked at is in terms of travel time. If you live in sort of Melbourne or Sydney or any of those metropolitan areas, there's certainly traffic is a very stressful part of a role, and we wanted to know some of those indicators that were causing stress and impacts to the industry lives as well. So some of the things about where people live and how far they are away from their work is certainly in that sort of space as well. And as you go into each role, this is the snapshot of typically of each of the roles of a typical pool lifeguard. Some of these are quite surprising. Certainly the pool lifeguard role sways in terms of the male female. We generally have the proportion of male or female is more in lifeguarding than other roles. Compared to there, and certainly the age underneath the age of 24 is very much a key part of that. If you have a look at some of those other areas, 55% normally have a second job, and at least 60% are studying. So it's a busy time for our lifeguards during this period in this sort of space as well, in what they do and how they do it. And certainly that age group of the 24-year-old, 18 to 24-year-olds. Really highlights in the pool lifeguard section that it's 40% of them, but in other areas of the workforce, it's quite different. In terms of a centre manager or a facility manager or the like, this is really where the change occurs, typically in the workforce profile. The age starts to get towards that sort of 45-year-old age group. Certainly the male-female demographic has changed quite significantly in this sort of space. We see the more full-time workers in this area, and obviously the income has changed as well. And the time in the industry usually shows that our centre managers are coming through the industry in order to be able to reach those positions as well. From a duty manager, one of the things we noted with the duty manager is that some facilities just simply don't have duty managers, and there's also a range of different titles for a duty manager, ranging from a duty manager that performs lifeguard duties through to a duty manager that looks after everything, including the aquatic operations, but also the gym and the basketball court and the like as well. So we need to take that in consideration of this sort of space. Interesting enough, the duty manager is one of the ones that tips the scales in terms of the male-female demographic. So for whatever reason, there's a lot more males than females in this particular profession as part of it. There's also a lot more longevity in terms of that 3 to 5 years and the 6 to 9 year time frame. With a single employer for a duty manager in this sort of space as well. It's very much about the lifestyle for the duty manager, and that was a fairly overwhelming statistic in this sort of space, that people are in the industry and staying in the industry within this role because it suited their lifestyle and what they want to do with their lifestyle in this area. What is certainly maybe surprising to some is that even though we've got a broad age group of duty managers, there is still about 50% of duty managers who are doing formal study as well at some point in stage throughout their career as part of that, and just under half also have a second job. As you can see, when we've looked at duty managers and the pool lifeguard, and we talk about the the swim teacher here now. From a national point of view and from an industry point of view, considering that these roles are the major part of our workforce, it really indicates that we have a lot of people in the workforce compared to the availability of work time in that sort of space, and that changes because of the nature, but also it affects the ability and the capability. And when we've got a tragedy like we're having at the moment, we've certainly seen some real impacts in this sort of space because of the casual workforce, and we may not see some of these areas where some of the workforce may have gone to other jobs when facilities start opening. We are seeing some small indications already of this in those states and territories that have started to open up, where casual staff have simply gone to another job because they needed some money during this time. The other interesting fact in this sort of space as well is very much the employment status in terms of who is the employee. Certainly, local government is a major employer of in the aquatic industry, but the rest is really some of those your major agencies or contractor agencies in this sort of space as well, who have a fairly similar statistical nature in terms of their percentage of their workforce in this sort of space, and the percentage of hours that casual workforce is doing as well. The swim school manager. This is if you have a look at the swim teachers and the swim school manager, very much a female-dominated part of the industry. Our age breakdowns, if you have a look at the swim teacher versus the swim school manager, we're starting to get more in that sort of 35 to 45 year bracket as well. Certainly, the income it has raised, which is understandable in this sort of space, and our time and our future years in the current role is expected as well. One of the things there, if you have a look down the bottom, is one of the questions that we did ask was how long do you expect to be in the industry, and as you start getting into some of these management roles, the time expected in the industry increases. But in the lifeguard and the swim teacher roles and the tech op roles, it's very much a short time frame, and not many people expect to be within the industry longer than 5 years. Tech operator, once again, male dominated. The age is slightly older, very much a full-time capacity here, so a different demographic again. Hours of work are fairly split across the board, but obviously those factors regarding a second job and studying is still fairly high. Is flipped in this sort of case where they're not very high for a tech operator to have a second job or to be studying. So it is their primary point of employment in the sector as well. The other one is the office worker. This was a fairly hard one to define, purely because the roles are quite varied. Some of these are customer service focused, some of these are management focused or gym focused, and some of them are purely administrative focused as well. But it does certainly paint a picture for you in terms of the percentage of the industry, which is consistent with some other reports that have been undertaken in this sort of space as well. Just quickly, so this is the first part of this report. As I said earlier on, is that there's a second part which is imminent to be produced. It'll be produced in a similar format in terms of the profile report. The profile report that you look at now is about 15 questions that we asked. So there's another 46 questions there, which the second profile will really look at. The other part, as I said earlier, is the behavioural research, and the partners that we've worked with in this space. We've used them on a number of different cases. most recently is some of the work they've done looks at the behaviour behind individuals' decision making and thinking to driving in floodwaters. And the differences between male and females in different age groups and some of the cognitive processes that individuals go through before driving in floodwaters or choosing not to drive in floodwaters in this sort of space. And that's certainly been recognised. That was presented at the World Conference on Drowning Prevention recently as well. So it's a fairly well recepted piece of research that they do in this sort of space. We're really looking forward to this. Part of the research for the behavioural side of things was only done on lifeguards, and it was very much about the impacts of the job role, and particularly dealing with rescues, potentially drowning victims, and a number of people had been involved in incidents where there was a death of one or more persons. And some of the insights that we're learning from this space really will open our eyes up in terms of how we train and how we induct and how we look after our staff in that particular way. And one of the key things that sort of come out in the initial results is that most lifeguards in this sort of space don't really expect to be actually involved in a drowning or a severe incident like that. Given that their job is a lifeguard and they've just completed a lifeguard course, that's a very interesting perspective, and it correlates with some of the other information that we know that most lifeguards who are involved in a drowning incident, a public pool, don't stay within the industry for more than 3 years, and actually most leave following the incident as well. And that's something as a sector we've got to get better at. We've got to support our staff, certainly at a training and induction level and professional development level, but certainly through some of those mental health challenges that our staff face with some of those significant events, be they rare for our sector, but they are. There is 30 to 35 a year, which end up with someone in hospital and with some form of impact to their life future on as well. In terms of timeframes, as I said, the second part of the profile is just getting signed off as we speak, and it'll go to design process as well. From there now, once we sort of get over the bulk of the COVID times and the sector starts to reopen back up, the Aquatic Industry Committee will meet again to look at this information and further information that we will gather as part of the impacts to COVID-19, and look at a strategy and how we can improve for this sort of space as well. There's already some indications of what we do need to look at across the board in terms of some of those skills gaps, which have some high percentages that the industry are really looking at from a communication and an interpersonal skills point of view. And certainly some of the big ones which we've really got to tackle and get some lessons learned in terms of how do we try and change the curve of the amount of people that are leaving the industry in generally and not staying within the industry, and especially those ones that are impacted by our events, is some challenges that the sector really has in this space to try and look at and get a better understanding of as well. Just finally, is this type of information, this type of report, while Royal Lifesaving have undertaken the analysis and have published the report, it's very much been a team effort by a number of organisations. Certainly, a lot of follow-up with the surveys to get people involved in what the survey is and to answer the questions and a number of points of views, noting that there's some other surveys as well, and that National Aquatic Industry Committee have been instrumental in that sort of space to allow us to give a picture of really what the sector are looking at, and we've already agreed to do this again in 3 years later to be able to do some comparison reports and post evaluations of where we were in 2019 and where we want to be in 2022. Thank you very much, and open for some questions.
Thanks, Craig. That was fantastic. Anyone, feel free to drop a question in the chat bar. We've got a couple of people who have mentioned where they're from. So we've got who have we got? We've got Stacey Jennings, Latrobe City Council, Adam Kavanagh, City of Greater Geelong, Bruce Alexander, Aquazone, Warrnambool. So we've got our regional centres well represented there. Welcome, everyone. If anyone has any questions, it's a great time to ask Craig. This is Craig's last stint, as far as I know, on the AFAR series. So if you've got any burning questions for Craig, now's a fantastic opportunity. But otherwise, we don't have anything sort of coming through here, Craig. Thank you so much for covering what's happened in this space and what's to come. I'm sure everyone's interested in the next sort of steps. And still no questions.
Still no questions.
Strange one. Anyways, yeah, thanks so much again, Craig, on behalf of Fitness Australia, Lifesaving Victoria. It's been great having you on the AFAR series on a number of occasions, and on yesterday you were on the education stream talking about the National Swimming and Water Safety Framework. That recording is up on our webpage now if anyone is interested. Last week or the week before, I believe last week it was emergency management we were talking about, incident emergency management, and the week before lifeguard health and fitness research, which was that one was highly engaged. There was questions flying in left, right, and center on that one. But there's 4 recordings up there, everyone. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more from Craig and Royal Lifesaving and the projects and research that they are doing in this space. As Craig's mentioned, there is a new COVID-19 guideline. Make sure you get across that and implement that in your facility, particularly if you're already open, as some of the facilities are in South Australia, Northern Territory. I'm not sure about WA and Queensland at this stage. Do you know if they're open yet, Craig?
WA are under a 20 person rule, which is slightly different from most other states in that sort of space. And Queensland have the less than 10 people in a facility. So some facilities are trying to open, and some facilities are just simply staying closed because it's economically challenging to maintain with those sort of restricted numbers.
Just not feasible, eh? Okay, everyone, stay tuned as well. I'm just off the phone with DHHS and their pending sort of release of water quality management plan templates and guides, which obviously you'll need to put in place and consider also in line with the COVID-19 GSPO and the existing GSPOs as part of your overall risk management framework. That is probably it then, Craig. There's nothing come through. Thank you so much once again. It's been great having you. And we'll get this recording up on the webpage probably by the end of today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And thanks very much for having me.
Okay. Take care, Craig. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.